lost a full generation of young men.
When they were going over to Europe, I could see where the excitement was.
They went because everybody was going. All their buddies were going. Everybody from around the world was going.
You read some of the letters that were sent between like mothers and sons and husbands and wives, and it's just heartbreaking.
These were our boys. They have DNA that run in our veins today. They were from St. John's, from the small bays and villages and communities. These were our boys.
Here in this peaceful park in St. John's, Newfoundland, there are some monuments to the thousands of men who enlisted with the Newfoundland Regiment and the thousands that died during the First World War.
This statue is called the Fighting Newfoundlander. It was built in honor of men like Walter Green, a war hero and an ancestor of Allan's.
That's right, Walter was my great-great-uncle. He was a police constable who fought beside and enlisted with his buddy, J.J. Tobin.
Now, J.J. was a distant relative of mine, a barber from downtown St. John's. Walter and J.J. were just 20 years old when they signed up and shipped out together on the sealing ship, the Florizel, in 1914.
The boys had no idea that the journey that they were about to embark upon would change the history for the country of Newfoundland forever. The country of Newfoundland wanted to honor the thousands of men who gave their lives during the First World War, so they erected this caribou, the emblem of the regiment, here in Bowring Park.
Now, this is one of 6 caribou. It points towards Europe, where there are 5 more, one at Newfoundland Park at Beaumont Hamel, and the 4 others marking significant battles fought by the regiment during the First World War.
Now, I should say, the road to Beaumont Hamel started long before France. The lads trained in Scotland before ultimately sailing to Turkey.
These young boys, many of whom signed up for a lark and figured they'd be home by Christmas, soon found out that the First World War was going to be a lot more than they bargained for.
September 1915. The Newfoundland Regiment was extremely anxious to land here on Kangaroo Beach in Gallipoli.
The boys wanted to seize this body of water, the Dardanelles. With it came access to Russia and a way to get weapons and ammunition into Eastern Europe.
Now imagine, you're a young fella, you're 16 or you're 17 years old, you land here, you're Walter, you're JJ.
All of a sudden, shells start exploding. You get a little further inland and Turkish snipers are picking off your buddies. Shrapnel rips them wide open.
It's madness. And if the boys wanted action, well, they arrived here, they got it.
Just weeks before in Scotland, the boys had been anxious to get here. Now many of them were saying that they had no idea what they're going to be in for.
Think about it, a lot of them were just kids. In fact, throughout the entire First World War, out of maybe 1,300 deaths that were sustained by the Newfoundland Regiment, almost 300 of them were boy soldiers.
The only thing worse than not knowing what you're in for is knowing. Francis Lynn was 35 years old, but his weapon wasn't just the gun he was carrying. He also carried a pencil and a paper, and he wrote columns back to the Daily News so the folks back home would know what was going on.
His nickname was Mayo, Francis Mayo Lind. And the boys called him Mayo Lind because I guess they were getting kind of sick of English tobacco, so Mayo wrote home and begged for them to send some of the Newfoundland Mayo tobacco. The most interesting thing about all this, as far as I'm concerned, is that the Newfoundlanders were never supposed to be here in the first place.
No, the men who were supposed to be fighting here were a group of Scottish soldiers. They were on their way to fight in Gallipoli when their train derailed. 200 men were killed. So the British command looked around to see who could fill that hole, and they looked to the Newfoundlanders.
The regiment joined the British 29th Division, sealing not only their own fate, but the fate of our nation as well. As the months drag on, right?
Yeah.
The conditions get worse. The Allied forces are trying desperately to push themselves farther up the hill. Each soldier is carrying a ton of gear on their back, about 60 pounds of gear. They got extra clothes, food, water, a bayonet, a ground sheet to keep themselves warm, plus they got about 75 rounds of bullets each.
And one of these, an entrenching tool, basically a pick and a shovel, all in one. Imagine what it'd be like in the hot Turkish sun trying to dig out a trench.
Imagine now, what it's like to be a young fella coming all the way over here, right? And you're here for all those brutal months, then November sets in, flash floods everywhere.
The trenches just fill up with water. They're like rivers. The walls are caving in. The boys are covered in mud.
There's bodies on both sides of the trenches.
And then the rats start climbing up into the bodies and using the chest cavity as a nest.
The flies on everything.
Disease is just rampant.
Imagine that. So these Newfoundlanders are now hit with all these tropical diseases.
Yeah.
And on top of that, December kicks in. Everything freezes, malnutrition, frostbite.
Ice everywhere. And they say that as many Newfoundlanders died of, or were being treated for dysentery as died from being shot.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that this engagement was as much about illness as it was about action.
Even poor old Mayo Lind couldn't find anything funny to say about it. I was reading this last night. He said, "The people who fitted us out for a warm climate when sending us here had a poor idea of what it was like. Back home, Newfoundland women, good Newfoundland women, are knitting socks instead of more, thinking of helping the boys.
Yeah.
What Mayo said they really needed was rat-proof shirts."
Brutal.
I don't think the men really knew what they were getting into, because for them it was an adventure and a trip, and it was bravery. They were going to be the heroes. They were going to save everyone.
This is the Asmack Cemetery. So apparently there's about 1,000 soldiers buried here. And 2/3 of the graves are unmarked, and there's at least 12 Newfoundlanders buried here. There's a Hines here, I think. Ellsworth.
Wonder who that guy is.
It's Newfoundlander, though.
Never know where you find a Newfoundlander. Imagine that.
How did a Newfoundlander get this spot in this cemetery?
You know, I actually know who that is. I was reading about him 2 nights ago, honest to God. He is Private Lodge, Sam Lodge. He was, they considered, their best and brightest. Everybody loved him. He was the most liked man in the regiment, and he was a big, quiet, reliable college guy, nice guy, not big, loud fella, pretty much just a quiet, nice guy.
Sure he's a Newfoundlander?
Exactly, maybe. But anyway, people loved him, and when he died, it really hit him. It was a weight. It was like, oh my God, he's gone. And normally in the camps, in the trenches, there'd be a little bit of singing or what have you, or a little bit of joking around, and everybody, top to bottom, every man was dead quiet. And they said that when he died, his last words were, "Don't bother to lift me down from the parapet, boys. I'm finished." So even as he was dying, he thought, like, don't worry about, like, I'm gone. Don't anybody come and get me. And it really hit him, and it was dead quiet until one of the guys started singing an old Civil War song, "Tenting Tonight on the Old Campground."
We're tired of war on the old campground. Many are dead and gone.
And everybody just sat there in silence and listened to him sing. They couldn't believe that this guy was gone.
Brave and true, who've left their homes, others been wounded long. We're tenting tonight, tenting tonight, tenting on the old campground.
Gallipoli was a huge disaster for the Allied forces, but there were a few small victories, and the Newfoundland Regiment was a part of a very important one.
So the Newfoundlanders are holding the line over here, and the Turks are using this hill for cover.
Yeah, that's right. And kind of about where we're standing was a sniper hold, and it was causing a huge amount of casualties to the Allied forces. And a group of Newfoundlanders, about 12 of them, decided, enough of this, we got to take it out.
So they wait until it gets dark. The Captain James Donnelly takes a couple of the boys. They come up here, they surprise the Turks.
Yep.
They take over this spot. Not only that, they turn the Turks' own guns against them. They think it's a much bigger force than they expected, and they shag off out of it.
That's right, and the Newfoundlanders are punching well above their weight.
As always. Now your ancestor, your much braver ancestor, was a huge hero on this spot.
That's right, he was. Walter Green was a part of that force, and he was coming up, taking the wounded, and bringing them back to safety.
That's amazing. And then for his valor, Captain James Donnelly wins the Military Cross, and Walter Green
wins the DCM.
It's amazing.
And the other soldiers were so impressed with what the Newfoundlanders were doing, they named this area Caribou Hill. According to Mayo Lind, the war wasn't entirely ruthless. Apparently, the Turkish soldiers would often help the men they shot, offer them cigarettes, and even sometimes tend to their wounds before they brought them back across enemy lines.
Lind also says that the Newfoundland men felt sorry for the Turks and the terrible conditions they fought in. Some were even starving to death.
And if this memorial is any indication, Lind was right. The man who wrote the inscription was not only a commander in the Turks' army, he also went on to found the Turkish Republic.
Mustafa Kemal Ataturk's words must have brought some comfort to grieving Newfoundland mothers when he wrote, "You, the mothers who sent their sons from faraway countries, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom and are in peace."
After having lost their lives on this land, they've become our sons as well.
Az önce şunu söylemiştim, ben bu aslında Türk milletinin hissiyatının ifadesiydi. Onlar bize aslında bütün insanlığa barışın mümkün olabileceğinin
In the end, that little victory for the Newfoundlanders at Caribou Hill was the closest anyone ever got to Constantinople.
There's no doubt that the Newfoundland soldiers were respected as brave fighters. In fact, when the Allied forces had to evacuate, the Newfoundland Regiment was the last to leave this beach in maybe this exact boat or one just like it. But overall, the battle was devastating. Over 50,000 Allied soldiers were either dead or missing, some bodies never to be recovered.
In the end, it was a coming of age for the lads. They were finally beginning to learn the real meaning of the word war.
And if Walter and JJ thought that this baptism of fire was going to be the worst of it,
they had no idea the absolute hell that was waiting for them in France and Belgium.
the scenery in the Somme Valley in northern France is absolutely breathtaking. As the sun rises on the tiny town below, it's hard to believe that this was host to some of the bloodiest battles during the First World War. Battles that killed so many Newfoundlanders, devastating their loved ones back home.
After the brutal loss in Gallipoli, the Allies were desperate to turn it around and change the course of the war. The Germans had blasted their way through Belgium and into northern France. British and French military leaders planned a counterattack. It later became known as the Battle of the Somme.
The battle was 12 weeks away, but there was still lots to be done. The regiment had to get themselves to Beaumont Hamel, which is about 12 kilometers from where we are in Louvencourt.
This is where the boys came to prepare for the Battle of the Somme. This is where they trained in the hot summer sun, carrying equipment, digging trenches, and getting used to the feel of the gas masks on their faces, the invention of one of their own, Dr. Clooney McPherson.
When the Newfoundlanders showed up in town, the locals said they could hear them singing and laughing from a mile away. Their excited new faces were a welcome change for a town that had suffered so much loss.
Just before the battle, the Newfoundlanders came here to this church for one last service.
Apparently there was over 300 people in the church, so many in fact, the congregation spilled out into this very churchyard.
The women of the town wept openly at the service. They'd come to love the young, cheerful Newfoundlanders who remind them so much of their own husbands and sons who were so recently killed in the war.
When the boys set off for Beaumont Hamel, the villagers lined the streets so they could say goodbye.
Soon, the townspeople would be mourning the fallen Newfoundlanders as well.
When they signed up for the war, they never knew it was going to be this intense, and they thought they would be home for Christmas. I can't even imagine it, honestly. Like, walking through the trenches, and I can just imagine what it would be like to be in there day after day after day.
Soldier priest.
Father Thomas Nangle enlisted when he was 27 years old and became the padre of the regiment, giving them comfort on the battlefield and sadly sometimes performing the last rites.
But I think what Nangle will be most famous for is not what he did during the war.
It's what he did after. Nangle returned to France. He was there when many of the regiment fell. He saw them buried in mass graves, and it fell upon him to locate the missing.
Keep in mind, when Nangle found those bodies and relocated them to proper burial grounds, some of the men had been buried for up to 5 or 6 years.
It was a gruesome task, but that's what the Good Shepherd does. He locates the missing sheep and he returns it to his flock. Nangle couldn't bring the boys back home, but he could make a home for them here.
He managed to negotiate with up to 250 different farmers to purchase the land where Newfoundland Park now sits. Also, he managed to acquire all the spots where the Caribou monuments are across France.
After the war, he returned back home to oversee the construction of the National War Memorial there. Then he left Newfoundland, never to return.
Actually, Nangle left the priesthood as well.
His son, Hugh, told me that stayed with his father all his life. And his son also said his dad used to have, when they were exhuming and interring the bodies, the smell and stuff, he said his father suffered from that a lifetime. He could never get that smell out of his nostrils. He used to shower constantly.
My father was guilt-ridden about that for years because he was a major force in recruiting for the regiment. It was the most difficult thing he had to do.
Inside this cathedral, some of the monuments that Nangle put together in honor of the Newfoundland Regiment are there. Let's have a look.
At the end of the war, grateful France erects plaques to commemorate the involvement of the Allied forces.
We have New Zealand, Australia,
Canada,
and the Dominion
of Newfoundland.
Canada inherited this when they joined with Newfoundland and Confederation in 1949. This was Newfoundland soil in France. The Newfoundlanders spent the 2 nights leading up to the Battle of Beaumont-Hamel trying to gather information from behind the German lines. It's called trench raiding. It's a great way to find out exactly what your enemy's up to.
The lads wait until it's dark, then they paint their faces black and remove their military badges and anything else that might give them away.
The boys' plan was to slip into the German lines, attack, and if they were lucky, maybe even take a prisoner.
But things don't go as planned. The boys lose the element of surprise. The Germans are onto them. There's only one way out of this. It's trench warfare. Hand-to-hand combat is brutal and it is bloody.
Walter Green was actually severely injured in that attack. He suffered 36 different injuries, and he was taken off the front lines for over a year.
21-year-old St. John's boy Fred O'Neill sees a grenade land close to his buddies. Without skipping a beat, he picks up the grenade and he throws it back at the Germans. But it explodes just as it leaves his fingertips, ripping off his arm and shoulder. Everyone agrees. If it wasn't for the action of one man, a lot more Newfoundlanders would have died that day.
The surviving members of the trench raid had some very interesting information for their superiors. Everything they thought to be true wasn't. The German wire was intact. The Germans seemed to be doing fine, and it looked like the Allies were completely outnumbered.
But the commanding officers don't listen. The plan is going ahead. The boys are going over the top on July 1st.
This is exactly where the Newfoundlanders went over and advanced forward from. we're kind of standing in a part of the park that isn't open to the general public.
It's fenced off in this area.
And it's kind of special to be here. We're in a place where not a lot of people get to go. It's pretty intense. From here, they march forward towards the German lines, far off in the horizon there.
At this point, the Newfoundlanders are the only people advancing.
That's right. The Essex and the Newfoundland Regiment were the only two that were called to go over the top at 9:15, but for whatever reason, the Essex didn't go.
One Newfoundland Regiment soldier, Ken Goodyear, who was here on that day, he said that you could smell the blood like a slaughterhouse.
Imagine, they had a front row seat for the first two waves to the battle already. They saw everyone who went before them was mowed down. They knew the battle was a failure, but they had to go anyway.
When they look forward, they're seeing their own death in front of them. And another member of the regiment said it's a good thing that mothers did not see the way their sons died that day.
So this is the famous danger tree.
At this point, next to this tree, there's a gap in the wire.
Most of the regiment were already mowed down, and anyone who was still alive had to fit themselves through this tiny gap in the wire, and very few of them made it past it.
The Germans are watching. It's easy to pick the guys off, and there's one thing making it even worse. It's a tin triangle cut from a biscuit tin. It's meant to identify the regiment to pilots overhead, but in the hot July sun, the glare makes for an easy target.
The next day, when the boys came out to collect the wounded and the dead, the stack of bodies here was so high, they actually found a soldier who was still alive. A bullet just grazed him. He had been trapped at the bottom of that pile of bodies.
This is effectively where the battle ended for the Newfoundland Regiment.
Out of the 800 boys who crested the hill at St. John's Road,
only 68 answered the roll call the next morning.
Back home,
the country of Newfoundland goes into complete shock and a state of mourning.
I mean, we were a country that was used to hardship, but we'd never seen anything like this.
In just minutes, they were all gone. So many young men losing their lives, and only 68 answering roll call afterwards is just, I can't believe that.
Just for days after, they'd be trying to creep out in the middle of the night to get some of their friends back, and those who were living or barely living, I guess, get them back to the trench to get some medical attention. The smell of death on your hands is very true, because they were actually dragging their friends and their buddies and their family, in some cases, back to the trenches in an effort to save their lives.
On the 1st of July 1916, the Royal Newfoundland Regiment suffered 91% casualties. In terms of proportion, if all of you had attacked this morning, 2 of you would be left alive. Imagine the coach goes back to Bishopbriggs Academy, and all your friends and family are standing waiting to meet you, and 2 of you come out the coach. Can you imagine the grief, the incredulity? That is exactly what happened to the families in Newfoundland. They lost almost all their young men within 40 minutes. On the 14th of November, the day after the front line was captured here, Captain Hunter gave orders that the remains of the dead should be collected. As they went among the bodies to lift them, the whole place became alive with a sea of rats that had been embedded in the boys' bodies. It was a vision from hell. That's what it was like. So the remains of some of them were taken and buried in the battlefield.
eerie feeling. When we went to the Y Ravine Cemetery, we were given soldiers' graves to stand next to, and I stood next to Lawrence Murphy's, and I stood at attention. And well, the last post was played, and all that was going through my mind was, I wonder how old he was, or I wonder how he died, or who his family was, and it's like all that stuff goes through your mind.
This is the grave of our old buddy, Mayo Lind. At this point, when he died here at Beaumont Hamel, he was quite the sensation back home. People were loving his letters home, and they were writing a lot of letters back. One of the last things Mayo wrote home before he died here was, tell all friends that the 1st Newfoundland Regiment are okay, and never feel downhearted. We'll make you all proud of us someday. Truer words never spoken.
The beauty of the place strikes you, and what a spectacular monument it is to the day and to the troops, and you know, the fact that it was set up in the first place, and the fact that it's been maintained to this level of respect is glorious. It doesn't take long after that you start thinking about the horror of it all. Yeah, you see the graves and you see the, you know, the situation that those guys were put in. It's kind of hard not to get angry a little bit about it.
This is one of the more heartbreaking stories we're going to tell you about. It's that of Otto Herbert Adams. Now, when Herbert signed up, he told recruiters that he was 18 years old, but in fact, he was only 16. Herbert was his mother's only son, and when he signed up, she was devastated, and she would be constantly sending him packages and letters, even though money was very scarce back then. Sadly, very few of those packages ever actually made it to Herbert.
Herbert joined the unit in the field the day before the massacre of July 1st. The rest of the boys said that Herbert never really got over what he saw that day. When the Germans attacked, he ran, but there was no escaping his fate. Herbert was to face a court-martial. The charge? Desertion. The punishment? The teenager was to be shot by his fellow soldiers.
Now, back home, his family didn't know anything about this. His mother was getting very anxious. She wasn't hearing back from Herbert. The truth was, her son was sitting in a jail cell. His death sentence was overturned, and he was now serving 10 years.
The regiment was in desperate need of soldiers, so Herbert was taken from his prison cell and put back on the front lines.
Herbert's mother went from being anxious to furious. She kept writing her letters. She wrote the brass and said, I call this war outrageous murder from the beginning. I cannot see how you could send out a poor boy that was so badly shell-shocked as lots of the boys that returned home told me he was. Please try to do your best for a poor, broken-hearted mother.
In the fall of 1917, Herbert was reported missing.
The boys who were killed died instantly, most of them, or died a short time after wounds. But just think about it. For the mothers who had borne these sons and who had nurtured them, could never find out where they were buried. So they took that tremendous loss to the graves with them. Mothers were truly casualties of war.
I mean, you read some of the letters that were sent between like mothers and sons and husbands and wives.
If things go wrong, write mother and tell her all was well. Give her all my love.
And it's heartbreaking to read the stories that they would send home to their parents.
They just mowed us down, but our boys showed no fear. Don't worry about me. Cheer up and don't be downhearted.
And then sometimes the letters would just stop and you'd get one that said, you're not going to be receiving any more, your loved one's gone.
Herbert was just 18 years old when he died, the same age he claimed to be when he enlisted. He never saw his heartbroken mother again. And he wasn't the only one. This memorial is considered to be the final resting place of the Newfoundland soldiers whose bodies were never found.
It's a hard thing to ever imagine that you've been brought up that this is such a glorious thing, only to, when it's too late, realize that it's all just a lie. It's terrible conditions. You're fighting a war that should never have happened, and all for what? That was, I think, what got to them when they got over, that it was completely pointless. It wasn't an adventure. It was just a pointless endeavor.
Beaumont Hamel was a devastating loss, not only for the regiment, but for the country of Newfoundland as well. Before long, our boys found themselves right back in the trenches of the Somme once again. Maybe it was anger, shock, or something else, but this time it was with a different type of determination. They were more bold and fierce than ever before.
Back up to full strength with a fresh load of new recruits from back home in Newfoundland, it was time for the boys to show the world what kind of soldiers they really were. Their assignment? Take Hilt Trench, a German stronghold just outside of the tiny town of Goudecourt. The regiment advanced in front of a creeping artillery barrage, so close in fact that some of them were hit by friendly fire. But what they were marching into was something even more brutal.
So, just like Gallipoli, the Newfoundlanders are advancing inch by inch, and they're hit with a huge attack from the Germans.
Right, and they're going inch by inch. They finally get to a point where they can launch a grenade barrage. Grenades go in, killing some Germans but creating havoc so they can't get to their posts, or the machine guns, Newfoundlanders into the trench.
They jump into the trench and they end up in hand-to-hand combat. Bloody, it's a brutal fight.
Bayonets are out. It's 15 minutes they're fighting hand-to-hand, fighting tooth and nail for your life for 15 minutes, which is terrifying and exhausting.
Yeah, right. I mean, you can't even imagine. And then eventually the Newfoundlanders take the trench. You know, when you're growing up, you hear all about Beaumont Hamel. You don't often hear about the successes and everything the Newfoundland Regiment goes through after Beaumont Hamel.
Yeah.
But in comparison, 300 people died in Beaumont Hamel, plus all the injured. We lost 120 Newfoundlanders. Our country's in mourning already. And there was another 120 dead.
And some of their best and brightest, including James Donnelly, one of the heroes of Caribou Hill.
Who was with my great uncle Walter Green in Caribou Hill.
And another name for Caribou Hill was Donnelly's Post.
He was a beloved member of the regiment. He goes down.
Right after they've taken this, they're celebrating their victory.
He screams out, "Boys, the trench is ours."
And he's riddled with bullets and is killed.
The story of this caribou here in Montjuïc is something straight out of a Hollywood film starring our own Newfoundland Regiment. It's an incredible tale about 9 Newfoundland soldiers who managed to stave off over 300 Germans.
A huge German counterattack is underway. It's not going well for our boys. The British and Newfoundland Regiment are all mostly either killed or wounded. In the confusion, British officers have forgotten to place reinforcements in the town. So at the time of the attack, the only people in the town are the staff at Newfoundland headquarters, some medical staff, and the wounded.
So this attack has been a disaster. Almost everybody's captured or dead. It's 10 months after Beaumont Hamel.
And once again, the regiment is decimated.
It's completely decimated. And Lieutenant Colonel James Forbes Robertson is back at the headquarters.
He has no idea what's going on because once again, communications are down.
So in walks this Essex soldier. He's freaking out and he basically says, "Look, man, the arse is out of her."
Well put. He says, by the way, you might want to know that there's 300 German soldiers about 300 yards away and they're coming right here.
And Robertson knows he's the only thing standing between the Germans and them taking this town. And if they do,
it'll take 40,000 men to retake it. He has to do something. So he looks around and he picks a rifle up from the hands of a dead soldier. And he says, boys, I'm going out there. Who's with me?
Now, Robertson was beloved by the Newfoundland Regiment.
They pretty much follow him anywhere.
So they do.
Right. So he gets about 20 people to go with him.
They all run out the door, including the Essex soldier who trips, falls, hits his head, and knocks himself out.
Finally, the boys get to a point where they can see 300 Germans, and about 100 yards across from that is a hedge.
Robertson looks at the boys and says, boys, we got to get to the hedge.
So they make a run for it, but of course the Germans are watching them, and they start picking them off. By the time they get to the hedge, of the 20 men, there's only 9 left.
There's 9 of them. There's 300 Germans. They figure, what are we going to do?
So it's an impossible situation, and in an impossible situation, Newfoundlanders do what Newfoundlanders do best.
Bluff.
So they realize there's no ways they're going to take 300 Germans, but they can keep those Germans from finding out that there's only 9 of them.
So they decide strategically that they're going to pick off all the runners who are bringing communications back to the German army.
They managed to take out 40 of these runners, and the Germans never find out that they're fighting 9 guys.
All in all, they managed to hold this position for up to 4 hours until reinforcements come and help them out.
It's a huge success, and back home, the boys become legend.
Yeah, they were known as the Manchi 9.
So famous, in fact, that the Brits sent over a film crew to have a look at them.
That's right. Years later, Private Fred Curran, who was one of the Manchi 9, was quoted as saying, "We successfully created the illusion that we were a large, invincible force."
Invincible indeed.
We remember those men for their service and their sacrifice, and the sacrifice that they made. Everyone needs to know what they did and how they did it.
This Caribou marks the Battle of Cambrai.
By now, the regiment had received a reputation for being fearless, and they had also gotten a number of citations for their bravery as well. But what happened in Masnier is really what reserved a place in the history books for the Newfoundland Regiment.
This was the site of a ferocious battle that dragged on for 2 weeks. Things got so bad for our boys that they had to resort to fighting with picks and shovels.
And it caught the attention of King George V of England.
And he bestowed upon them the title Royal. No other regiment in the First World War received this honor.
Your imagination can only do so much, but it gives you that sense of scale and what you were asking people to do. It's a very defined area, Newfoundland. I mean, it's an island. Labrador is a huge empty space. It's a very defined area with a very few number of people. And whichever way you look at that, that's an enormous commitment to make. And I think the King recognised that very early on for exactly that.
They were now the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. It was a real boost to a group of men who seemed to be spending more time burying their friends than they were fighting the enemy.
2 of these friends being buried were Walter Green and J.J. Tobin. They both died on the first day of the Battle of Cambrai.
These 2 friends signed up together, sailed off together, fought together, and ultimately
they were buried together.
Walter was killed in the morning of November 20th in a first wave attack against the Germans.
While J.J. died leading a group of Newfoundlanders to the canal, they were 24 years old.
Probably the most heartbreaking thing was that just 4 months earlier,
J.J. was married in Montreal by proxy. J.J. couldn't be by his bride's side because he was on the battlefield. This is the only Caribou in Belgium. It marks the final advance of the Newfoundland Regiment before the end of the war in 1918.
And very near here is the spot where Tommy Ricketts was awarded a medal that was not given to any other member of the Newfoundland Regiment.
The highest recognition that the British Army could offer, the Victoria Cross.
This is where the impossible happened.
German guns were at the edge of this field. They're giving our boys a really hard time.
We needed some volunteers to go up and take them out, so Matthew Brazel and our man Tommy Ricketts stepped forward.
The boys start advancing across the field in short 10-meter bursts, and Tommy is firing a Lewis gun from his hip.
Now they're running and they got a load of gear. They get halfway across and Tommy decides, I gotta drop some weight, we're not moving fast enough, so he leaves some ammo behind.
They get about 100 yards away from the German guns when click, click, they run out of ammo.
What are they gonna do? They're pinned in by the Germans. Tommy says, you know what, I'll go back and get the ammo. Brazel covers him.
Tommy runs the gauntlet and every German gun is pointed at him. Somehow, miraculously, he isn't hit once.
I mean, he doesn't have a scratch. He gets there, he grabs the ammo, then what does he do? He runs back.
Tommy does the gauntlet a second time. Some Germans are shooting at him at point blank, yet still, somehow, not a bullet hits Tommy Ricketts.
He gets to the spot that they were, but Brazel's pushed forward and he's all alone.
Tommy does the only thing he can do. He loads the ammunition, he points the Lewis gun at the Germans, and he gives them hell.
Finally, the Germans are like, all right, bye, enough, we surrender.
That day, Tommy Ricketts single-handedly took 5 field guns,
4 machine guns,
and 8 German prisoners.
Tommy Ricketts signed up for the Newfoundland Regiment when he was only 15 years old.
When he was just 17 years old, King George V pinned the Victoria Cross on his chest.
It's heart-wrenching. Just knowing what they went through and the stories they had and all the sacrifices. They did so much for us and it's incredible.
It's hard not to think about what else was lost and what role they may have played in the country of Newfoundland. It's really tough not to think that we lost a little bit more than we thought.
When it was all said and done, one of the men who survived the war, Howard Morey, later wrote in his 70s, "When I look at my buddies that did come back, a lot of them just moping along, broken and bent looking, I often wonder who had the best of it, those who did not come back or those who did."
He lived to be about 87 or 88, and I guess he had to live with that guilt in some ways that there was like 15, 16-year-olds that had their full life ahead of them that ended up dying in an absolute tragedy, and he got to live out the rest of his life. So I guess there was a feeling of guilt that goes along with that.
There's no doubt that the war changed the nation forever. Of the 6,000 men who joined the regiment, over half of them were killed or wounded.
In fact, a lot of people would say that Newfoundland's crippling war debt and the lack of able-bodied men to be able to enter the workforce led to our bankruptcy and ultimately the loss of the country's independence.
But in reality, the only thing you can actually take away from these stories is the actions of the men themselves. Men like Walter Green and J.J. Tobin. 2 guys who loved life, who fought together, and were buried alongside each other.
From them, we've learned about courage, sacrifice, and most importantly, we've remembered.
We're tired of war on the old campground. Many are dead and gone. Of the brave and true who've left their homes, others been wounded long. Many are the hearts that are weary tonight, wishing for the war to cease. Many are the hearts looking for the right to see the dawn of peace. We're tenting tonight, tenting tonight, tenting on the old campground. We're dying tonight, dying